Representative Jay Obernolte of California is vice chair of the AI Caucus and a former video game developer. Congressman Obernolte is joined by the Messenger's technology reporter Ben Powers.
Well, Congressman, first off, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely, it's always fun.
Absolutely, and so just as a reminder to our audience, you can engage with our summit and everything else under the hashtag #TheMessengerAI, whether that be on Twitter, now known as X, or LinkedIn. But we're here to talk about sort of the AI learning curve. And so to begin, how do you think Congress is doing in that regard? ChatGPT has been out for over a year now, and there's been conversations, convening sessions going on. And so how do you think your colleagues are grappling with the technology, thinking about it, and really getting up to speed with something that's advancing rapidly?
Well, I think it's definitely a tale of two cities. On the one hand, I think Congress has done a very good job in acquainting themselves with the technology and spinning up a knowledge base about it and in developing a well of knowledge in certain members in both chambers of the legislature. On the other hand, we don't have very much tangible work product as a result of that yet. And I think we're a little bit behind when it comes to crafting a regulatory framework that's going to be appropriate for the governance of AI. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
Mm-hmm. And I know Representative Eshoo has decided not to run again for Congress, obviously.
That's too bad. She's wonderful. Yeah.
Exactly. And so are you worried that as there is turnover in Congress, there could be a bit of a brain drain in a sense of the work that's gone into understanding this technology? Eshoo being one example.
Well, I think if we worried about turnover in Congress, none of us would get out of bed in the morning. But it's a shame that Anna is leaving. She's been a wonderful member, certainly very technically knowledgeable. But we have lots of different corners of Congress that have people with a very meaningful experience, and so I have no doubts whatsoever that we're going to have a team of people that are not only deeply knowledgeable but also strongly motivated to help us solve this challenge.
Certainly. We'll have your co-chair of the AI Caucus, Representative Beyer, here later today to also discuss this. And something I'm thinking about in terms of education, right? Certainly Congress is trying to get up to speed. It's not just on you all, though. The public is also trying to understand AI better, as well as private industry. But some companies, in conversations I've had, reporting I've done, are really kind of integrating with AI as fast as they can. And that can come with, upside, but also risks. Without sort of that tangible progress that you're speaking about in terms of regulation, do you think it's wise for companies to really go, 100% full speed ahead when it comes to AI, or should they take a minute, just take a beat and be a bit more cautious?
Well, I think in a way, the fact that frontier models require such an enormous investment in capital to spin up right now is helping, because it means that companies are very cautious. When you have that much financial investment at stake, you want to make sure that you're going to get a return on that investment. And the way that you do that is you make sure that you're deploying the technology in a way that's not going to create liability for you. And I think that that's why you've seen companies be appropriately cautious in the way that they deploy the technology. And I think that one thing that's become abundantly clear is that AI is, on the one hand, seemingly miraculous, but on the other hand, very fallible, just the way that human judgment is fallible. When you look at things like hallucinations, which is something, if we had been talking about this 2 years ago, and we used the word hallucination, you wouldn't think about it in the context of the output of a computer algorithm. But here we are talking about the AI's propensity to kind of make things up on the fly. So I think everyone is aware of this now, which is a very healthy thing, because as we build decision-making processes around AI, I think you're not going to see any big company take the bold step of saying we're going to empower AI without any human input. People are saying, okay, for very important decisions, AI can create an opinion, can create a recommendation, but it's always a human that is involved in ultimately making the decision. And I think that's appropriate.
Yeah. When I think of AI, I think of it more as a funhouse mirror reflection of ourselves rather than something all-powerful, as we often see reported in the news. And you just spoke a bit about the companies that are developing large language models, LLMs, and the foundational models, so the ones that plug into APIs, do other things, and interact with other companies. There's only a few companies that, as you mentioned, have the capital to do that. We have OpenAI, we have Anthropic, we have others. Are you worried that in some cases there's too few companies developing this, particularly when we see Google, Microsoft, really entrenched industry players lining up behind and giving billions of dollars in funding to just a number of startups?
Very much so. And I'd like to, if I can, hijack your question and expand it, not just companies that I'm worried about. I'm worried about the context in which cutting-edge research into artificial intelligence is performed. So we have a rich tradition here in the United States of doing much of our basic science research and development in academic institutions. And the reason why that's important is because it comes along with a lot of transparency. There's publication where, if you've discovered something earth-shaking, you publish and you say, look what I found. And then there's peer review where people at other academic institutions fact check you and double check your work and make sure that what you've discovered is actually what you think you discovered. That can't occur if it's all done behind closed doors. And we're in danger of becoming a society where cutting-edge research into artificial intelligence is done only in private, only by private companies, and I think that's very unhealthy. So that's why me and a number of my other colleagues are pushing for what we call NAIR, the National AI Research Resource, where we create a pool of compute and training data sets, and we make that available to academic institutions to make sure that a lot of that research continues to be done in academia and continues to be transparent.
And I think that's really important because a lot of the data sets that are used to train these LLMs are not standardized. They're really kind of more black box than they are open and transparent. And I'm wondering if you're thinking about that both in the academic sense, but also in the ones that the government might develop and work in coordination with academics to make those more transparent to everybody across the industry, just so we can better understand how these models are being fed because of, again, hallucinations, bias, other areas like that.
Right. No, I think you're absolutely right about that. But I also have a concern about the size of the training data set, because if you look at this latest generation of foundational models, it's become clear that this breakthrough that's happened, this transition from something that is human-like but still clearly machine to something that might actually one day pass the Turing test and convince people that it's a human instead of a machine. That transition has been fueled by an order of magnitude greater size of training data. I mean, in some cases, most of the public-facing content of the internet. So if you would imagine being a researcher in an academic institution, how on earth do you get access to something so broad? It's its own little kind of mountain to climb. So we want to make sure that kind of resource is available to people that want to use it.
And I will say, in collaboration and coordination and whatnot around this engagement process, right, getting input on regulations, doing that educational work, both for members of Congress and everybody else, I've heard concerns from smaller AI companies. I've heard concerns from some academics that they don't feel as engaged in this regard because so much of the current regulatory conversation has, again, been driven by the bigger players, which is a natural starting point given their advanced engagement and funding. But I'd be curious about what you had to say to smaller companies, people that are maybe feeling a bit on the outside of that regulatory engagement.
Oh, well, I would say engage. We certainly have reached out to them. It's, we on the task force have been engaged not only with the big corporate players in the AI space, but we're interested in talking to the broad spectrum of stakeholders here. So we've been talking to academics, we've been talking to technologists, futurists, ethicists. In particular, I am a big believer in seeking out people that disagree with me. I want to understand their thinking, and I want to see what it is in their worldview that maybe has escaped me as I look at the way that I view this technological landscape. So if there is someone out there watching who feels that way, I would say, please come talk to me, talk to the task force. We have an open door policy, and we would love to talk to you and get your input.
Mm-hmm. And you spoke earlier a bit about the lack of maybe material progress regarding legislation that we've seen. But in the last 6 months, is there anything that's been introduced? And certainly there's been a lot of things introduced that really stands out to you as though you being above the rest.
Oh, of course. Our bill. The Create AI Act, is one of the, I think that's, as I look at what I think needs to be accomplished to create a regulatory framework for AI, I am a big believer in incrementalism. I think it would be foolish to believe that we could come up with a single AI act that completely addresses everything, solves the problem, sails through both chambers of Congress and is signed by the president. I think that that's a fool's errand. But that means that we'll have to be incremental, and I think that that's appropriate because there are things that are very clear that are hazards that need to be mitigated now. And I think we understand enough about those to be able to craft legislation around them. But there are also things that are addressing more midterm and distant threats that are really a little blurry and not in focus right now. And I think that it's okay to wait and make sure we understand what those threats are and how to mitigate them before we craft that legislation. So I believe that the task of regulating AI is not something that's going to be a month long or a year long. I think this is going to be several decades of 5, 10 bills a year out of Congress to address various issues, and then taken together, that will be the regulatory framework.
And so long term, it's murky. I totally understand that. But quickly before we turn to questions, what's top of mind for concern for you in that murky future when it comes to long term? Because I think even people that are familiar with AI, and certainly you come from a technology background yourself, so you're more familiar, it's advanced more rapidly than I think a lot of people expected, even in the last year.
Sure. Well, I think that in my mind, there are 3 things that are near-term threats that we absolutely have to make decisions on soon. The first of those is how to mitigate against AI's ability to pierce through digital data privacy and re-aggregate data that's supposed to be disaggregated and use that to create behavioral models to influence people's behavior. That's something I worry about. And it's something that AI can do now. So I think that Congress has to finish the work that we've started in crafting a unified federal digital data privacy standard. And that's something that I know Energy and Commerce we've been working on that this year. I'm hopeful that in the next few months we'll see the reintroduction of some legislation that can get through both chambers of Congress. And then there are 2 decisions that we have to make, I think, very soon. And one of them is what is Congress's approach to AI regulation going to be? Are we going to follow the European Union, where we spin up a brand new bureaucracy and we require anyone using AI in anything but a low-risk setting to apply for a license to use it from that agency? Or do we follow what other countries like the UK are doing and take a sectoral approach, because the risks of AI are so contextual, to say that AI could be risky in one context and not in another. So do we empower our existing sectoral regulators like the FDA to take the lead there? And that's something that we're at a fork of the road. We can do one or we can do the other. We can't do both. So we have to decide about that. And then the second thing is we have to decide, is this something that the federal government does, or is this something that we empower states to experiment in? And I think we've seen in the digital data privacy realm the hazards of allowing states to preempt what is clearly a federal prerogative of regulating interstate commerce, which digital data privacy is clearly interstate commerce. I think AI is pretty clearly interstate commerce in a lot of contexts. So, I think that we need to make clear to the states, look, here are the guardrails, and outside of these guardrails, you can regulate, but inside these guardrails, this is reserved for the federal government, and I think that needs to be done soon.
And I want to jump in. I think we have one question. We asked our audience to send in video questions as well, and I believe we have one now from research analyst Ava Kelly.
Hi, my name is Ava Kelly, and my question is, what aspect of the Biden executive order surprised you the most? What did you find notable about the Biden executive order, and how, if at all, do you expect it to guide congressional policy priorities going forward? Thanks.
That's a great question. The executive order, I think in general is very helpful. If you read through it, it's clear that the White House and OSTP has done some very deep thinking on the impacts of AI on federal government and what federal government needs to do in response to AI. There's a lot of great stuff in there. There's also some things that I would consider overreach, and I know there's always this balance of power, this tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch, but there are things in there that certainly impinge on the legislative branch's prerogative to enact regulation. The ultimate source of regulatory authority is not the executive branch, it's the legislative branch. In particular, the invocation of the Defense Production Act, I think is very inappropriate. I don't think it would stand up to legal scrutiny. That's something that was supposed to be just in wartime, and for the administration to be attempting to use that to require companies to self-report their use of compute, for example, I think is and I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad idea. It's something that we're looking at as well. But the executive branch does not have the authority to do that. It has to come from Congress. So, but I don't want that to take away from, overall the fact that this is a good thing that they're doing deep thinking on this issue, and it's something that I hope we can partner with as we move forward in crafting, a mutual regulatory framework. Right. Because ultimately it's got to be a partnership. The legislative branch and the executive branch have to, working together, create this standard and enforce it.
Well, that's why we're having this conversation. Thank you so much, Congressman.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks, everyone.